Hello, I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas war. It is currently the eve of December 5th, 2023 in the United States, the morning of December 6th, 2023 in the Middle East. Starting with a report regarding the aftermath of the October 7th attack, the New York Times reported today that the head of the International Crimes Division in the Israeli police stated that the unit is probing dozens of cases of rape and allegations of sexual violence that occurred in the Hamas attack on October 7th. Among others, one of the reasons that the police is probing these allegations just now is because of a technical issue. When the medical units and military and police arrived on scenes on October 7th, this was officially defined as a war zone rather than a crime scene. This means that bodies were taken from the scene without forensic experts first coming to the scene, and only now are they able to examine the bodies more closely and accumulate more evidence and start matching what was found in different Hamas cameras and forensic cameras, and then start matching what were the crimes that actually came out. And that is one of the reasons that the Israeli police is only now starting to mount enough evidence in order to start saying they are probing dozens of cases of rape and sexual assault. Moving on to the reports regarding the hostage situation, one of the people who were defined missing from the October 7th attack is now officially defined kidnapped. That means that the IDF is now reporting that there are 138 people that are still held hostage in the Gaza Strip. In addition, there was a report today regarding a meeting between the family members of those people who were held hostage and the Israeli War Cabinet. According to reports, the meeting rose to very high tones in which the family members were yelling at the Prime Minister Netanyahu and at different members of the War Cabinet. Among others, Netanyahu stated to them that, I'm quoting, "There are Hamas demands that you wouldn't agree to either, things related to our state and our very own existence." And the families later reported that all we heard in essence is that there's no way to bring everyone back right now. According to the reports, those who had returned from captivity stated that they were witness to the bombings that the IDF was carrying out in the Gaza Strip, that they were held in buildings that themselves were bombed out, and that the ongoing war is endangering the hostages that are left behind. Somewhat related to this, Hamas senior leader today, Osama Hamdan, stated yet again that there will be no negotiations between Hamas and Israel until there is a complete cessation of hostilities. This is Hamas' new line since the truce broke down. It has repeatedly said that until Israel ceases all hostilities in the Gaza Strip, there will be no negotiations regarding any more hostage exchanges. However, countering this, today Qatari foreign minister spokesperson stated to Al-Quds Al-Arabi newspaper that Qatar is continuing its negotiations and that both sides are still exchanging ideas regarding how future hostage exchanges may take place. In addition, responding to discussions in the U.S. and Israel regarding speculation about the female hostages that were left behind, speculations in the last couple of days have surfaced both in Israel and the United States that possibly they were victims of sexual assaults in captivity, and that is the reason that Hamas did not want to release them. IDF spokesperson stated today that the discussion about this is irresponsible, inaccurate, and should be avoided. Moving on to reports regarding the ongoing fighting in the Gaza Strip, there were continuous rockets and mortars fired from the Gaza Strip towards the south and central parts of Israel today. Rockets targeted the areas in the south of Magen, near Oz, Ashdod. There was a direct hit in two different incidents in Ashkelon, in which a building was badly damaged, and another two people were injured. There were also rockets and missiles sent towards the Gushdan Shfira area, substantial barrages towards Tel Aviv, in which was a direct hit, also in several areas from shrapnel that landed, as well as rockets towards Ramat Gan, Petach Tikva, and Rishon LeZion. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, the IDF officially announced today the second phase of the war, as forces moved into the areas of Jabalia refugee camp and Sajaiya up north, and Khan Yunis in the south. The IDF stated that these have been the most critical 24 hours since the war began, as they are now moving into very, very intensive urban areas and areas that Hamas has heavily fortified. In the Jabalia refugee camp, the IDF brigades surrounding the camp has gradually started moving in. They uncovered rocket launching sites and directed a lot of Air Force attacks, and also took over Hamas's main headquarters in the entire northern region of the Gaza Strip. In Khan Yunis, thousands of IDF soldiers are already reported in the heart of the city in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. The forces entered from the Netzarim corridor in the north. This is specifically important because this meant they bypassed the central city of Deir el-Balach. This is one of the most central cities in the heart of the Gaza Strip, as well as the refugee camps Nusirat and El Burej. These areas the IDF has not touched yet. It has bypassed them in order to enter into Khan Yunis. Hundreds of gun battles and confrontations with Hamas operatives are reported in Khan Yunis itself, which I will add is a much larger area than Gaza City up north, and has its own tunnel network. And there are reports that there are over 1 million people that live in Khan Yunis prior to the war, and that many people that were forced to evacuate from the north of the Gaza Strip have taken up refuge in Khan Yunis, and this is going to complicate the fighting even more. The city also has at least 4 different Hamas brigades, and is led by a division commander named Rafa Salam, which the IDF has specifically stated it intends to target. Palestinians reported that there were intensive gun battles and fire belts bombing throughout Khan Yunis, and that the IDF continues to move into the heart of the city. There's also reports of substantial bombings in the northern Sajaiya, as well as in Deir el-Balach and in Beit Lahia, all in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Moving on to some summaries, the IDF stated today for the first time that it estimates that upwards of 6,000 Hamas operatives have been killed since the war began, out of a rough estimate of 20,000 fighters that the group has in total. In other summaries relating to the artillery units of the IDF, the spokesperson of the IDF today stated that since the war began, over 100,000 artillery shells have been fired into the Gaza Strip, offering support to the ground units moving in. There is also reporting growing concern in Egypt after the establishment of makeshift tent cities of Palestinians near the Egyptian border. Reportedly, after Palestinians are now being ordered to now evacuate from the different areas of Khan Yunis, they are now heading south towards the town of Rafah. This town is split between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, and more tent cities are popping up along the border with Egypt. Egypt is very worried that eventually they will be forced to burst through the border and take refuge in Egypt. Regarding casualties, 9 IDF soldiers were reported killed in the last 24 hours, 8 of these in the Gaza Strip and 1 within Israel. 3 of them were in Sajaiya itself, bringing the total of IDF soldiers since the invasion of the Gaza Strip began that were killed to 85. The Palestinian Health Ministry is reporting that upwards of 16,248 Palestinians have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began, and there are still several thousands. Yesterday they reported 7,000. Today they did not give an accurate report of people that are still buried under the rubble in the wreckage in the Gaza Strip. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, the IDF today announced a pause of several hours in the El Janina region in Rafah, I'm quoting, in order to allow humanitarian resupply and respite. Prior to the truce, there were agreements in which the IDF was going to allow a 4-hour pause each day in different areas in the Gaza Strip. Since the truce collapsed, these have not been upheld. This is the first time the IDF announced a pause on its own volition. Presumably this was coordinated with different units of the UN. In Khan Yunis, the IDF announced to civilians that the Salah Hadin road, which is the main highway in the Gaza Strip going from north to south, which prior to the breakdown of the truce was a humanitarian corridor, the IDF has now announced that that is considered a war zone, and that civilians are to evacuate the Khan Yunis area through the western corridors leading to safe zones in Rafiq and in the areas of the Muasi, which are right near the coastal areas. In addition, the War Cabinet in Israel today debated a U.S. request to triple the amount of fuel that is entering the Gaza Strip to 180,000 liters per day. According to reports, the U.S. stated that this is vital in order to stop the spreading of diseases and can buy the IDF more time in its operation. I will note this is much larger than the initial reports yesterday, in which the United States was going to ask Israel to double the amount of fuel that enters. Now the United States has asked for it to be tripled. Likely this is part of a negotiation tactic, and both sides will agree eventually on doubling the amount of fuel that enters to roughly 120,000 or 130,000 liters per day. Relating to the likely agreement of Israel to this increase, Prime Minister Netanyahu stated, and I'm quoting, "The war effort is supported by the humanitarian effort. We know that if there is a humanitarian collapse, plagues, disease, water contamination, it will stop the fighting." Israel's Minister of Defense Gallant also stated, I'm quoting, "Those who are pressuring us on fuel, I think that is a legitimate demand. It is a small gesture versus something much greater." Presumably this is referring to the diplomatic umbrella the United States gives Israel with regards to the war. Gallant is stating, allowing more fuel to enter is not a big deal. No official reports were given the amount of aid trucks that entered in the last 24 hours. Since the collapse of the truce, the number has hovered around 100 to 150 aid trucks, and the continuous entrance of 2 fuel trucks a day with 69,000 liters of fuel. That maybe would enter today as well. There were reports that trucks did manage to enter through the Rafah crossing, but the UN was unable to establish how many trucks entered. Neither Egypt, nor the Palestinian Red Crescent, nor the IDF reported on the amount of trucks. Moving on to the West Bank, the U.S. State Department announced today that it plans to limit the visa entry of permits to violent settlers from the West Bank. The report in Axios specifically stated that the list involves several dozen settlers who have attacked Palestinians since the war began, as well as their immediate families. The United States has been threatening to do this already for several weeks. Now the report is out, and it is likely to happen in the coming days. Responding to this in questions in a press conference, Minister Gantz in Israel, who is a member of the War Cabinet, stated that he does not like the term settler violence, since these are radicals that should be stomped out, but they do not represent all Israeli settlers in the West Bank. Defense Minister Gallant also stated that there are a lot of radicals who are not settlers themselves, adding, "We do not need outside help fighting against this." It is noteworthy that the United States has pressured Israel already for several weeks to crack down on settler violence that has been ramping up in the West Bank against Palestinians. It seems now that the United States has given up on that and is taking its own measures in order to pressure those settlers in order to stomp out the terrorism against Palestinian civilians in the West Bank. Regarding the ongoing fighting, one Palestinian was injured in the town of Hebron. After not adhering to soldiers' orders to stop at a checkpoint, he was shot in the leg. In other news in the West Bank, there was intensive IDF activity reported in Jenin refugee camp. 3 Palestinians were reported injured as the IDF entered to search for weapons. There was more activity reported in the Tamun areas and in the Al Farah area refugee camp, and 2 Palestinians were reported killed in these 2 areas. 21 Palestinians were reported arrested throughout the West Bank in the last 24 hours. There are more reports of IDF activity in the Kalandia and Dahaisha refugee camp near Bethlehem that happened in the last 2 days, and there are reports that several Palestinians who were injured, one of them may have died from their injuries. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Ramallah in the West Bank today reported that a total of 260 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since the war began, and upwards of 3,200 have been injured. One more report I'll give that is noteworthy to look towards when it comes to violence in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Israeli police today issued a permit to a group of right-wing activists in Jerusalem to carry out a march under the title Restoring Israeli Governance in Temple Mount through East Jerusalem and specifically the Old City of Jerusalem on this Thursday. This is likely to lead to rising tensions. They're marching through a route in which they often carry out what's called the flag parade, which often leads to confrontations and escalations every year. Right now, the police authorize only 200 people to participate in the march, but it is noteworthy to look towards Thursday. There's likely to be some escalations in East Jerusalem. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, the southern parts of Lebanon, there were continuous rockets and mortars launched from Lebanon towards Israel in the last 24 hours. Substantial barrages targeted the Kiryat Shmona area where there was a direct hit of one of these rockets. There were also rockets sent towards Kfar Giladi, Tel Chai, Misgav Am, and also Araba, Ramsha, and Adamit in the western Galilee. And there was a drone that was sent from Lebanon that crashed in the Margoliot area, also in the upper Galilee. The IDF retaliated against a range of Hezbollah targets throughout Lebanon, targeting, as it often does, different infrastructure, lookout posts, and launching sites. The Lebanese military reported today that one of its soldiers was killed and several were injured in an Israeli retaliation. The IDF reported that in a Hezbollah launching site and lookout post near the El Awadi area that is near the border in Lebanon, there was a reported threat and suspicious activity. The IDF attacked the site, and the IDF issued an official apology stating that it regrets the incident in which Lebanese soldiers were killed. Responding to media questions about the escalations in the north, Prime Minister Netanyahu today stated, and I'm quoting, "Right now we need a decisive victory in the south," referring to Gaza Strip, "and an effective deterrence in the north," which tells us also about Israel's intentions, at least right now, does not appear to lead to further escalations in the north. Israel's content with this ongoing quote-unquote game of chicken between Hezbollah and Israel, these ongoing low-level escalations, rather than a full-on confrontation. Hezbollah also claimed responsibility for 4 different border incidents that occurred in the last 24 hours. These usually involved random shootings against IDF outposts or against IDF soldiers along the border. Some reports regarding the regional developments. There were reports in the United States today that the U.S. is planning to establish an international nautical task force in order to escort ships through the Red Sea. So in the last weekend, there were 4 different attacks that occurred against different maritime vessels in the Red Sea. These were all attributed to the Houthis. They took responsibility for most of them. The United States has said this is a threat to international commerce and is now trying to set up an international task force in order to ensure the safety of ships traveling through the Red Sea, specifically the area controlled by the Houthis. Moving on to some of the political and general trends that occurred in the last 24 hours, the Emir of Qatar, Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, today accused Israel of genocide in the Gaza Strip and criticized the international community for allowing this. He stated, and I'm quoting, "All moral, humanitarian, and human standards have been violated by Israel," calling for a permanent ceasefire between the two sides. In addition, officials in the U.S. administration today stated that they believe the current phase of the war will continue for a few weeks, possibly into January, before the IDF turns to what's called lower-level operations, specifically once it has control of the different cities, targeting the different leaders of Hamas. CNN reported that officials in the administration stated that they had harsh and direct talks with Israel, and that the U.S. warned Israel that it cannot undertake the same devastating tactics in the south as it undertook in the north, which tells us about the growing U.S. concern regarding Israel's plans for the south, and specifically fears of a mass uprooting of Palestinians again towards some area. Maybe this relates to the fears in Egypt that Palestinians will end up being forced to cross the border and enter Egypt. Other political news: Russian President Putin is going to travel tomorrow to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. There he is going to discuss the war with the leaders and international oil commerce as it is affected by the war. And then 2 days from now, he's going to meet Iranian President Raisi in Moscow. Moving on to speculation regarding the future of the Gaza Strip. In a statement made today, Prime Minister Netanyahu again reiterated, and I'm quoting, "Gaza will have to be demilitarized, and only the IDF can keep the Gaza demilitarized. I will not accept any arrangement of international forces." So this relates to a lot of speculations have been floated in the last couple of days about some sort of international force, possible regional Arab and U.S. force, or NATO forces, or UN forces who will take over the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu is again reiterating that as far as he's concerned, that's not going to happen. In other news, President Biden responded to questions and again stated that the only solution for the day after the war is a two-state solution, which again tells us about some of the growing contention between Israel and the United States and possible collision between the two sides as the war does eventually come to a conclusion, and there will be a day after question, and the question is, what is that day after going to include? That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.